Hey everybody, I'm Tim and today it's time to talk shop. You're watching Cigars Daily. Hey, get more out of this and all our videos when you join the community on Cigars Daily Plus. And for this video, I just lit up the brand new Diesel Desert Walker, the cigar I have been most excited about this year. It's finally in my hands and I'm just like over the moon about a cigar that to me is a perfect mashup of the Diesel Vintage Maduro and the Diesel Whiskey Row Founders Collection Boxer Grail Limited Edition thing. Both of these cigars provide something unique, but this cigar has the best part of both of them. So the big burning question today is, should I start a cigar shop? This is something I get asked more than I care to. It's a common conversation. A lot of people want to have this conversation with me, and I gotta tell you something. I like talking about this stuff. This is the part of the cigar world that I truly enjoy. I just happen to get asked about it by a lot of people who just like want to kick the tires, put their toes in the water, think about it a little bit. Exceedingly rarely do I get to have this conversation with someone who's really serious and sort of all in. And in personally in the cigar world, almost 10 years, almost 7 years doing content on Cigars Daily, I've had a bit of a run in the cigar industry and I've had this conversation dozens and dozens of times. And I've sufficiently helped like 3 or 4 people do this. And they're amazing people. I love keeping in touch with them. But truthfully, this is a thing that comes up a lot because a lot of guys have this idea. They're like, oh my gosh, when I'm done with my military career, or when I graduate from this degree program, or I'm done with my tenured time doing my job, I'm going to start a cigar shop. And they talk about it as if it's this like idea that they've had. Like the guy who thought he was the first one to think of advertising beer with scantily clad women. But he's not, because everybody's thought of it. A lot of guys want to start a cigar shop, and I understand why. It's a very natural thing to want to do. You walk into your local lounge, you see a dude sitting there smoking a cigar, and that seems to be all he has to do. It's just like the perfect life. And here you are walking around like a schmuck with all kinds of bothers in the world, the stress and the frustration, the responsibilities, things that you'd rather not have. And so it seems like a simpler life, but I want to give you today the tour of this conversation as I've had it with so many people, because when people ask me, Tim, I'd like to start a cigar shop. What do you think? I say, almost definitely should not do this. This is a bad idea in most cases. And for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense when you really evaluate what it's going to take. So my goal in this video is to help evaluate some of those things, some of the barriers to entry. And by the way, one thing that I've learned about Cigars Daily is that there are a lot of people in the cigar world, in the cigar industry, who watch this channel, even places where they put this channel on in a lounge, and for that we are incredibly grateful, and this is a big shout out to those places. But I'm going to invite cigar proprietors to sort of put their best advice down below about what to do, what not to do, and also invite you to ask questions. I think probably another one of these videos will be warranted for, should I start a cigar review channel? Which again, the answer is going to probably be no. And then another one about, should I be a cigar rep? Because those are the two other things people really want to do. But today we'll just deal with the shop issue. That's a big one. And with no further ado, let's jump right in. When it comes to this idea of having a brick and mortar lounge, it's very romantic to start off with. You imagine yourself in a cushy chair with all the cigars in the humidor that you like and want to have. And truthfully, that is, I think, part of the dream. I think anybody who has a cigar shop ends up wanting or getting those things. But there's a couple of things out the gate that you have to determine. The first one is location, location, location. This is something that's actually surprisingly simple as it comes to cigars, and not just where in town do you put a brick and mortar cigar shop. Of course that matters, and it's different for every town. But which town do you put a cigar shop in, and does your town support that? This is actually one huge thing I find that almost nobody's considered when it comes to starting a brick and mortar shop. The first thing is like a couple of just simple data points I can give you. So the first consideration here has to do with one simple thing that you've heard before, and that is location, location, location. And I'm not just talking about where in your town you're going to put a cigar shop. I'm talking about in what towns should a cigar shop go? Because it's not going to be all of them. And there's a simple formula I use for this, and this is just sort of general numbers to give an idea of what to expect in terms of clientele in a place like the one you might be thinking of. So here's a few details that are important to know. Number one, only about 1% of people smoke premium cigars. This is something that's well documented. It's not an overwhelming amount. That means that in the United States, it's something like 3.5 million people. That's about how many cigar smokers there are. There's not a tremendous amount of us. It's sort of a niche industry to be in. So you can take a look at your town that you live in and already determine sort of what's the limitation on clientele. I've had several people come in and speak to me about, I live in this little town. And the first thing I ask them, how many people live in your town? If the answer is 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, you can kind of get a broad picture of what that's going to look like. Now, in your town, it might be a little bit more than 1%. It might even be a little bit less, but 1% is like a nice, safe, round number. Then once you get down to a number of the possible clientele in a town, the next thing you got to consider is the challenging thing. The percentage of premium cigars that people just order online. It happens. And these days, that's a little over 60% of cigars. At least it was the last time I checked. So that means about 6 out of every 10 cigars in a person's humidor at home aren't coming from a brick and mortar cigar shop. So the best example that I can give of this would be if someone lives in a town of about 100,000 people. Well, you can very quickly limit your number of actual cigar smokers down to maybe around 1,000 people. And then imagine 60% of the cigars in those people's humidor are already coming out of online orders. So it would be a simpler way to say 60% of those orders are coming online. So then suddenly you've limited yourself to around 400 people or 400 walk-ins to your brick and mortar shop. And the question that I commonly find myself asking the would-be purveyor is, do you really want to run a 365 a day a year business off about 400 people? And quickly, I see the lights kind of start to turn on for people that there is a minimum size for a place to determine what before you're even going to put in a cigar shop. And even then, if you live in a much bigger place, you got to consider, is there already saturation in the market? You see, a lot of towns will have a cigar shop or two, and maybe it is the thing to do for you because you can do it so much better than it's being done. Maybe you live in the town where it's big enough, it can support a cigar shop, and there's 1 or 2 others, but they just suck, and you could do it way better. And in that case, maybe that's exactly what you should do, but there's one thing you've got to be abundantly aware of in the cigar world, and that is the limitations of a brick and mortar shop. Brick and mortar businesses are limited to the people who can walk in the front door every day. What I find with a lot of brick and mortar shops is that it ends up becoming like buying yourself a job. You buy the cigar shop, you build the cigar shop, and effectively what you've done is set yourself up with a maybe decent annual salary in exchange for doing the work of a business owner, where really instead the business owns you. Truth be told, over the years in the cigar world, I've seen like a lot of guys who own cigar shops. These are predominantly retired guys, okay? Not a lot of business people in the cigar world. In fact, there's exceedingly few. If you look at the cigar manufacturing side of it, a lot of cigar makers aren't really business people. They're Latin American farmers, for the love of God. These are people who know more about the soil and the seed and the sunlight. They know about curing and fermenting and sorting and rolling and resting. They know a lot about bale aging. They know about all that stuff. But when it comes to the business of getting these millions of cigars out to people, sometimes that's where they fall behind a little bit. But similarly, inside the United States, and I at least assume at other cigar shops around the world, you don't find a lot of business people there either. You see, the cigar shop model is so hit or miss that these days it seems to make the most sense for older, retired guys. And sounds like a joke, but it's not. These are guys who want to get a simple shop, run it in the black, and have a place to hang out and smoke the cigars they like with their friends to avoid their wife so that them and their wife don't kill each other. That's straight up. I've literally had cigar shop owners say to me, I only own this place so that my wife doesn't kill me. I have to leave the house during the day. And I've heard that from more than one. It's just a very simple business model that you kind of got to know up front what to expect to get out of it, because a lot of people go in, I think, with stars in their eyes thinking that it's going to be big and it's going to be great. Some people have a vision for that and it works, but a lot of the time you do just end up with more or less a comfortable place that you hope is running in the black. Now, like I said, there are some people who come in with a grandiose vision for a larger company, and I'm just going to tell you very briefly what that entails. Because if you think about it, you're like, oh, cigar, that doesn't sound very exciting, just to have a lounge, or can I really make it with a lounge? I'm going to tell you something that's sort of an industry insider thing. You don't really tell a lot of people this if you work and live in the cigar world, and hell, I might even piss some cigar lounge guys off with this one, because it's more or less a little controversial, but it's this. Cigar lounges don't make money. You don't make money with a cigar lounge. And here's the basic math of it. In a cigar lounge, what you'll end up with is probably a handful of regulars. Lounge lizards, if you will. The guys who come in every day. And gosh darn it, if they don't come in, you're calling the hospital because something's wrong. These are some of the most reliable people you will know. Typically older guys who are retired, they go do their morning ritual and then they show up at the shop, spend a few hours, and then go do whatever the hell else they do during the day. I don't really follow them once they go out the door. The truth is, these guys, while they may be some of your favorite people on the planet, from a business perspective, are not necessarily a cash cow. I mean, a lot of times in a cigar shop, what you get is a guy who maybe even is on a fixed budget, comes in, smokes about the same 2 to 3, maybe a $6 or $7 cigar every day, and then sits down in your air-conditioned lounge, uses the smoke eater, watches your television you're paying for cable on, and spends an hour talking to the clerk at the counter. The net cost of just having a guy sit in the chair is more than you spent and made on the cigar that he bought from you. If he spends $7, he burned at least $15 worth of your employee's time just having a conversation with him. So cigar lounges themselves, outside of brick and mortar events, are a tough way to generate revenue. Most cigar shop owners, and I think they'll be honest if they're telling you this is the truth, they love it when a guy comes in, buys a box of cigars, and walks right out the door. That's not a lot of people doing that. A lot of people like to get a cigar or two or a sampler, or they're on the way to the golf course, so they stop because the shop is there and it's convenient for them. But by and large, you're going to find that that lounge doesn't make a lot of money, and so you kind of got to know what else to do. I said earlier, some guys come in with a vision for this. And truthfully, whenever you see that vision, it typically exists out something beyond just a cigar lounge. But then guys will have some really good other ideas. Stuff like, oh, I'm going to do events every so often. And events are good. They're a lot of work, but they're pretty good. They build community. They bring people in. They create buzz. And at some point, that's when some of those people will grab boxes. At the same time, there are a couple of other X factors to consider when it comes to the cigar lounge model. One of them is people who start themselves a little online thingy. They start online, they try to build a community there, and that's something that some people have been successful at and some people have not. That's not something I'm going to talk about a whole lot here. You'll probably learn more about that on Cigars Daily Plus. The other big one is the cigar bar model. Now, this is my favorite one to pick on because cigar bars are an obscenely ridiculous idea. That being said, cigar bars are pretty damn successful, and so I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. But as one cigar bar owner who I spoke with a few months ago put it, he said, Tim, why in God's name would anyone ever start a cigar bar? And he referenced that 1% number. He said, do you know what percentage of the population smokes cigars? And I said, well, I happen to know that. It's 1%, sir. Thank you for asking something that I knew. He said, that's right. He said, what percentage of the population drinks? I said, I honestly don't know. I imagine it's half or more than half. And he said, exactly. Why would you limit an already limited thing? Not everybody drinks. Only some people drink, but how many of those people who drink don't want to be around cigar smoke? He said, why in God's name would you ever start a cigar bar versus just opening a bar? Like if your goal is to be successful, just do that. A cigar bar makes even less sense. Now, that being said, the cigar lounge model does seem to do substantially better when there's a bar or at least beer and wine at a place. You know, I'm in Phoenix where there are over 70 lounges. There's a lot in this area and there's more than a few cigar bars. And those are the places where the people I know in the cigar industry and the people who work in this industry tend to frequent a little bit more than the others. Now we've considered just a few of the important details that you've got to think about before you get into a cigar lounge. Number one, can your area support it? And is that a good place to put it? Is the location good? Number two, is the model going to even work? Is a cigar lounge appropriate for your goals? Or do you have to have some sort of X factor, something more exciting that generates revenue? The next thing to consider is, what do you actually need in order to start a cigar lounge? This is a big one. And outside of a business plan, which is an important thing to do before you start a business, there are three things that are really important. And I'm going to give them to you as straight as I can. Number one is money. You got to have money to start a business, and that has to come from somewhere. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation, and this is the point where people draw a blank. If you haven't figured this one out, don't move forward until you have. Number two, you need a lease on a retail location. And you typically need this as one of your first things because you need to have it in order to get the third thing, which is the appropriate licensing. And this is something that while I can talk at great length about the licensing that is, required for Arizona, I don't know necessarily for where you are because this is different in every state. What licenses you need, what rules and regulations there are, what are all of the little minutia of starting a cigar lounge that is required in that city, in that county, in that state. That's something you'll have to know on your own. But for the most part, if you've got money, startup capital as it's called, you've got yourself a lease on a brick and mortar space, and you've got yourself the appropriate licensing, those are the things you need before you can cultivate them, accumulate them together, and build the most valuable, precious thing in the cigar world. And that's some good old-fashioned relationships. This is the thing that I love about cigars, is that this industry is still totally relational. Which means you kind of got to get in the inner circles to work with a lot of manufacturers. It's one of very few industries where you don't go through an intermediary distributor in order to get product. Like a lot of cigar shop owners have individual relationships with a lot of different manufacturers. When they want Perdomo cigars, they call Perdomo cigars or their rep for Perdomo cigars. When they want to get AJ Fernandez cigars, they call AJ Fernandez cigars. That's like a very personable thing about this industry, but building those relationships is incredibly important. And typically to get in, you kind of have to make your way in with one or two reps, and then you can grow a relationship with the rest because they all talk to each other, and that's a big hint. Oh, and this is one pro tip, by the way. As I just mentioned, having a lease on a retail space. Do yourself one big favor. By God, if you've made it this far through the video, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, don't rent space in a strip mall. That's insane. Why would you do that to yourself? Don't destroy your business before it even opens. You move into a strip mall space in a little suite in between two other spaces, I will tell you what's going to happen. One of them is going to become a hair salon, and the other one's going to sell cat anxiety medication. It doesn't matter who moves in next to you. One of those two neighbors is going to complain about the smoke or the smell of smoke until the landlord shuts you down. It's inevitable. It's an eventuality unless you have an ironclad lease, which no reasonable landlord is going to give you. So if you're going to open a cigar shop with a lounge, make sure it's in a standalone building. This is the easiest and best key to success for location that I can possibly think of. Now again, if you've made it this far and you haven't given up and started crying in the corner because I've crushed your dreams, then let me give you a couple other little tips and tidbits along the way that I think will become incredibly important. One of them is, I mentioned that the three things that you need are your startup capital, you want a lease on a retail space, and you want your appropriate licensing, and that's good. One of the first questions that I get all the time is, how much? How much do I need, Tim? How much money does it cost to start a cigar shop? Holy cow, what a question without a singular answer if I've ever heard one. The truth is, the startup capital for a cigar lounge is going to be drastically different depending on what the model looks like. I can think of a half a dozen shops that I frequent around the valley here in Phoenix. I go to these different shops and they are literally all different shapes and sizes. Some of them, the one that I'm thinking of is a great cigar bar. They've got a bar there. The cigar selection sucks. It's one of the worst in the city, but they make good drinks. There's another one I go to with my wife when we go to dinner. This place has got an amazing cigar selection and like beer and wine and a kegerator behind the counter. Like the cost of starting up these two operations is so drastically different, it wouldn't even be worth me throwing numbers out at you. What I can tell you is this: when you come up with a good business model, a good business plan, you should be able to nail down what some of your costs are. If you can get the basic concept of what a wholesale cost of a box of cigars is, you can figure about how many facings you're going to put into a humidor based on the size of your humidor and back into it with the math. This is something that I've done a lot in business and highly recommend, is backing into whatever you want to do. You can start out with a simple goal. And if your goal is, I want a cigar shop that does $500,000 a year in sales, then you can back into it from there. You can break $500,000 down into the number of months there are in the year, figure out how much you'll need to do each month, and that will tell you how much you'll need to do each week and how much you'll need to do each day. And then from there, you can sort of begin to extrapolate what size of inventory will you need. What you don't want to do is cover your eyes and shoot at the target without really knowing. I see a lot of guys who are like, they think about the size of their selection and how many different brands they want to have in the humidor. But the problem is, if you got a brick and mortar shop, you're going to be limited on the amount of stuff you can store. You're not one of these big, huge catalog places that can have everything. Even among the very, very big brands, the biggest brands out there, your Drew Estates and your Davidoffs and your General Cigars, you're going to be carrying a limited selection of what they even make. And so you want to determine who's your clientele, what are they interested in. That's something you'll learn about as you go. But you can sort of start with a goal and back your way into that goal and see if the size of place and the number of cigars in there is even going to support what your goal will do at the end. And the next tip that I have for you has to do with the rules and regulations. This industry comes with red tape. It just does. There's no two ways about it. And it doesn't matter where you live. For the most part, in Arizona, things are pretty damn easy out here. The tobacco tax is 21.9 cents per cigar. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy. In some states, it's as much as 56 or 60 or 70% of wholesale. It's obscenely high with no cap. That means that the cigars there are considerably more expensive. But there are also weird regulations in some states that limit what you can do opening a cigar lounge. Learn what those are. And I'll give you one example of this. Washington State. There are regulators in Washington State who are still laughing about questions they got from a potential cigar shop owner from 15 years ago. Their rules there are so limited that you can do basically nothing to open a brick and mortar lounge aside from, retrofit a streamlined trailer and open up a lounge in it, like sell ownership shares to the people who go in. It's pretty complicated to do it up there. I only know one guy who's done it, and he did a hell of a job. But the truth is, all the states have got their own little things that go on. Like I said, some are easier. In Texas, it's like, I think the easiest thing in the world. Their tax there is like 1 penny per cigar. It's like, why even do a penny per cigar? It would cost more to administer and administrate the collecting of 1 penny per cigar than I think that 1 penny per cigar would even do. I think they're probably losing money on that tax. I don't know how that even works at all. It's beside the point. There's a lot to know if you're going to think about going into the cigar world. Having a brick and mortar shop, I think, is unbelievably rewarding. In my time in cigars, almost the last 10 years, I have had my hand in overseeing, owning, and managing 7 different cigar shop and lounge locations. I've worked with other people. I've worked for other people. People have worked for me. And that has been such a rush. I have gotten to be intricately involved in the community of cigar smokers. And for me, that is a huge reward. It's something that today I wouldn't trade for the world. And for people who want to do this, I imagine there's nothing I could say to stop them from doing it. So I have no problem pissing in your Cheerios just a little bit. My hope is that this is as helpful in terms of determining a direction or helping reveal something that hasn't been thought of before. But I know a lot of people out there who have thought about doing this, and I'm sure there are many, many more that I haven't spoken to who are thinking about it just as well. So I'll invite you again to drop your comments down below. If you've got some experience, share that with people. What was the one mistake that you made that you wish you hadn't have made? You could just go back and do it all over again. And of course, check this video out on the community on Cigars Daily Plus. Thank you all so much for watching. This is Tim, signing off for Cigars Daily, and I will see you in the comments.